Alice Harper had always been drawn to antiques. The intricacies of their designs, the history they carried, and the sense of timelessness they imparted all fascinated her. So, when she inherited her grandmother's old house in the quiet town of Ravenswood, she saw it as a perfect opportunity to embrace her passion. The house, built in the late 1800s, was filled with vintage furniture, aged photographs, and numerous relics of the past. But among all the items, one particular piece stood out: an ornate, full-length mirror with an intricately carved wooden frame. Alice had found the mirror covered with a heavy, dusty sheet in the attic. Despite its neglected state, it exuded a certain allure. The frame was decorated with twisted vines and small, unsettling faces that seemed to watch her. She felt an inexplicable compulsion to bring it downstairs and clean it up. Once polished, the mirror revealed a reflective surface that was almost too perfect, like a dark pool of water. Alice placed the mirror in her bedroom, unaware of the horrors it would soon unveil. The first few nights in the house were uneventful, filled with the usual creaks and groans of an old structure settling. But on the fourth night, as Alice was preparing for bed, she noticed something strange in the mirror. She caught a fleeting glimpse of a shadow moving behind her. Startled, she turned around quickly, but there was nothing there. She dismissed it as a trick of the light or her imagination playing tricks on her. However, the incidents became more frequent. Each time she looked into the mirror, she saw the shadow. It was always just at the edge of her vision, never fully visible, but unmistakably there. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, a dark, formless entity that seemed to pulse with malevolence. Alice's unease grew, but she tried to rationalize it. Mirrors could create strange reflections, and shadows could be cast from any number of sources. Yet, deep down, she knew something was wrong. Very wrong. Determined to understand what was happening, Alice began researching the mirror. She visited the local library and scoured through historical records, old newspapers, and any documents that might shed light on its origin. What she discovered sent chills down her spine. The mirror had once belonged to a man named Edward Blake, a reclusive occultist who lived in Ravenswood in the early 1900s. Blake was notorious for his experiments with the supernatural, particularly his obsession with trapping spirits. According to local legend, Blake had conducted a ritual to imprison a vengeful spirit within the mirror, believing he could harness its power. But something had gone horribly wrong. The spirit had turned on him, driving him to madness and eventually to a violent death. The mirror, tainted by Blake's dark rituals, had since passed through several hands, each owner experiencing unexplained tragedies and eerie occurrences until it finally ended up with Alice's grandmother. It seemed her grandmother had hidden the mirror away, possibly aware of its sinister nature. Alice was horrified. She realized she had unwittingly brought a cursed object into her home. The shadow in the mirror became more aggressive. It no longer stayed at the periphery but began to take shape, forming into a dark, humanoid figure with glowing red eyes. It would mimic Alice's movements, but with a sinister delay, as if mocking her. Sometimes, it would reach out as if trying to grab her, its fingers pressing against the inside of the glass. One night, Alice woke up to a soft whispering. It was coming from the mirror. The voice was low and guttural, speaking in a language she couldn't understand. Terrified, she threw a sheet over the mirror and tried to go back to sleep, but the whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent. The next morning, she found scratches on the inside of the mirror, as if something had been trying to claw its way out. Panic set in. She realized she was dealing with something far beyond her understanding. Desperate, Alice reached out to a local historian and paranormal expert, Dr. Samuel Kerr. Dr. Kerr had studied the occult history of Ravenswood extensively and was familiar with Edward Blake's dark legacy. He agreed to visit Alice's home and investigate the mirror. Upon arriving, Dr. Kerr immediately sensed the dark energy emanating from the mirror. He performed a series of rituals to communicate with the spirit trapped inside. What he uncovered was even more horrifying than Alice had imagined. The spirit was not just any ghost. It was a malevolent entity, a demonic presence that Blake had summoned and failed to control. It had been feeding off the fear and misery of those who owned the mirror, growing stronger with each passing year. Dr. Kerr explained that the mirror had to be destroyed, but it would not be easy. The entity would resist any attempts to break its prison. That night, Alice and Dr. Kerr prepared for the final confrontation. Armed with holy water, protective charms, and ancient incantations, they faced the mirror. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy, the air thick with an oppressive darkness. The shadow in the mirror writhed and twisted, its red eyes glowing with anger. As Dr. Kerr began the ritual, the entity lashed out. The mirror shook violently, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Alice felt a searing pain as the entity tried to breach the barrier between their worlds. Dr. Kerr chanted louder, throwing holy water at the mirror. The entity screamed, a sound that pierced through Alice's very soul. With a final, desperate effort, Dr. Kerr recited the banishment incantation. The mirror cracked, and the entity let out a final, anguished howl before the glass shattered, sending shards flying across the room. The oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by an eerie silence. In the aftermath, Alice felt a profound sense of relief. The malevolent presence was gone, and the house felt lighter, almost welcoming. Dr. Kerr warned her that while the immediate danger was over, the residual energy of the entity might linger for a while. He advised her to cleanse the house regularly and remain vigilant. Alice took his advice to heart. She continued living in the house, but the experience had changed her. She became more cautious, more aware of the unseen forces that could lurk in seemingly innocent objects. Years later, as she sat in her living room, she couldn't help but glance at the empty space where the mirror had once stood. She knew she had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, and she vowed never to let curiosity lead her into such danger again. Several years passed, and Alice decided to move closer to her family. She sold the house to a young couple, Sarah and Michael, who were thrilled to live in such a historic home. Alice made sure to remove all remnants of the mirror and warn them about the house's history, though she left out the more horrifying details, not wanting to scare them away. Sarah was particularly drawn to the attic, fascinated by the old furniture and relics stored there. One day, while cleaning, she found a small, ornate hand mirror tucked away in a dusty box. It had the same intricate design as the full-length mirror Alice had destroyed. Curious, Sarah brought the hand mirror downstairs and placed it on the mantel. As she turned to leave, she thought she saw a flicker of movement in the glass. She shook her head, dismissing it as a trick of the light. But as she walked away, the shadow in the mirror watched her, its red eyes glowing with anticipation. Sarah and Michael settled into their new home, blissfully unaware of the sinister presence that had begun to seep into their lives. At first, the changes were subtle. Sarah started having vivid nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat. Michael noticed that their once harmonious relationship had started to strain. They would bicker over trivial matters, their tempers flaring for no apparent reason. One evening, while Michael was working late, Sarah decided to do some more unpacking. She came across the small hand mirror again. The intricate carvings fascinated her, and she found herself staring into it, mesmerized by the delicate craftsmanship. As she gazed into the glass, she felt a strange sensation, as if something was watching her from within. That night, the nightmares intensified. Sarah dreamt of a dark figure standing at the foot of her bed, its red eyes glowing with malevolence. She awoke to find her reflection in the mirror across the room, but the eyes staring back at her were not her own. Panicking, she threw the hand mirror into a drawer and tried to forget about it. Michael, sensing Sarah's growing unease, decided to take matters into his own hands. He had noticed the change in her behavior and the strange atmosphere that seemed to permeate their home. One weekend, while Sarah was visiting friends, he decided to do some research on the house and its previous owners. He visited the local library and uncovered the same dark history that Alice had discovered. The name Edward Blake appeared repeatedly, along with rumors of his sinister experiments and the cursed mirror. Michael realized that the small hand mirror Sarah had found might be linked to the same dark forces. Returning home, he retrieved the hand mirror from the drawer and examined it closely. The intricate carvings and the unsettling faces were identical to the descriptions he had read. He felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the danger they were in. Determined to protect Sarah, Michael reached out to Dr. Samuel Kerr, hoping the paranormal expert could help them as he had helped Alice. Dr. Kerr agreed to meet them and assess the situation. When Dr. Kerr arrived, he immediately sensed the malevolent presence emanating from the hand mirror. He explained to Sarah and Michael that the entity trapped within the mirror was feeding off their fear and negative emotions, growing stronger with each passing day. The only way to banish it for good was to perform a cleansing ritual, similar to the one he had performed with Alice, but this time they needed to be even more cautious. Dr. Kerr prepared for the ritual, drawing protective symbols around the house and placing charms in strategic locations. He warned them that the entity would fight back, but they had to remain strong and focused. As night fell, Dr. Kerr began the ritual. The air grew thick with tension, and the temperature dropped dramatically. The entity, sensing the threat, manifested in the mirror, its red eyes glowing with rage. It lashed out, causing the hand mirror to shake violently. Sarah and Michael stood by Dr. Kerr, holding hands and chanting the incantations he had taught them. The entity's screams grew louder, reverberating through the house. It felt as though the walls were closing in, the darkness pressing down on them. Dr. Kerr continued to chant, throwing holy water on the mirror. The entity shrieked in agony, its form distorting and writhing within the glass. The hand mirror cracked, but the entity resisted, fighting to break free. With a final, desperate effort, Dr. Kerr recited the banishment incantation. The mirror shattered, and the entity let out a final, deafening howl before dissipating into nothingness. The oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by a calm, almost serene atmosphere. Sarah and Michael collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. Dr. Kerr assured them that the entity was gone for good, but he advised them to cleanse the house regularly and stay vigilant. In the months that followed, Sarah and Michael slowly rebuilt their lives. The nightmares ceased, and their relationship returned to its former harmony. They remained in the house, taking Dr. Kerr's advice to heart and maintaining a regular cleansing routine. The small hand mirror was buried deep in the woods, far from their home, in a place where it could cause no further harm. Sarah and Michael often spoke of their experience, grateful for each other and for the strength they had found together. As time passed, the memory of the dark entity faded, leaving behind only the faintest of scars. They knew they had faced a great evil and emerged victorious, their bond stronger than ever. And so, the house in Ravenswood stood as a testament to their resilience, a place where the past was laid to rest and the future shone bright.